welcome everyone. So you see the title on the screen, Avid Suite for Construction, TimberScan with Embedded Pay from Avid Exchange. I just want to take a moment and explain. So I'm sure many of you are aware that at the end of last year, Avid Exchange acquired Core Associates, the developer of TimberScan. And what that has done is that has actually created a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to accomplish something that we have tried to, we have been in the process of trying to develop for the past several years. And it's a complete purchase-to-pay solution where we can take everything from the initial purchase through the AP routing and approval process to the pay process and do all of that from within TimberScan. So please don't be thrown off by the title Avid Suite for Construction. Everything still revolves around TimberScan, and it's all built with the concept of running everything through TimberScan as one system, one place to go for everything. So what we're going to do today, we're going to be covering the review and reviewing the purchase-to-pay process. I'm going to talk about the steps involved, the things that we consider purchase-to-pay. What we'll also do, I'm going to dive into the software, and I'm going to show you the embedded pay program. And then we're going to dig into automated payments and how you can maintain control. One of the things that I think is interesting is that over the past year, there was a survey that was conducted throughout the industry. And one of the, as CFOs of various organizations were asked the question, do you plan to digitize or automate your accounting functions within the next year? And 96% said yes. What I think is interesting about that, if you think about what happened about a year and a half ago, a little less than that, when COVID hit, everyone was faced with the issue of how are we going to continue to process and manage our accounting functions, our accounts payable, accounts receivable, whatever it is, remotely, because for the most part, everyone was having to work from home. And probably one of the biggest challenges within that was, how are we going to continue to produce checks that we're going to send out to our vendors? So one of the things that we've done is we've built this pay process inside TimberScan to eliminate that. And it now gives us that full purchase-to-pay concept. So when 96% of CFOs say that they are planning to automate or digitize, it is interesting that I think a lot of that was precipitated by what happened a year ago and has kind of grown from that, so that people will have the flexibility of being able to manage everything from one place and be able to do it all electronically. Okay, so let's talk about the purchase-to-pay solution. When we're referring to purchase-to-pay, the end in mind is for you to have one place to retrieve all of your information around an invoice. So we're trying to achieve that with a seamless integration between what we refer to as best-of-breed products. So when I talked about the acquisition of Core Associates by Avid Exchange at the end of last year, basically what we did is we took best-of-breed solutions where we have within TimberScan the AP routing and approval solution, and Avid Exchange has the Avid Pay Network. We've now combined them so that you're able to manage everything from within TimberScan and still take advantage of all of the things that the Avid Pay Network can provide you, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So I'm going to go through the steps that are involved, and we're going to start with, what did we purchase? So this could have occurred by you issuing a purchase order, perhaps in Sage 300. Maybe it's a purchase order that you created within TimberScan. I'm not sure if you're aware, but TimberScan does have a purchasing solution. Or it could have been something that maybe you just did manually, or you didn't write a purchase order at all. But no matter how you created that purchase, or if there was a purchase order associated with this, TimberScan has the ability to manage against that particular purchase order or commitment. Secondly, what did we receive? So we created a purchase order. Did we receive all of the goods associated with that particular purchase? What were we billed? Now we're starting to get into that AP workflow process. And now we're talking about taking the invoices, entering them acquiring and entering them into TimberScan, and then proceeding forward from there. Proceeding forward means now we're sending it off to the approver. So step 4, who approved this billing? So now we have all in one place what we purchased, what we received, what were we billed, and who approved it, all within TimberScan. Finally, from the approval side, how is it costed or how is it coded? Was it charged to a particular project? What cost code, what phases were involved? Maybe it wasn't charged to a job. Maybe it was charged directly to a general ledger account code. So all of those things are compiled together. They're all available and easily accessible within TimberScan. Now we get to the payment side. So we've taken that workflow, we approved the invoice, it was sent over to Sage 300, and now we're going through and we're doing what we would traditionally consider to be a quote-unquote check run. So we're saying, okay, what was the payment status? And finally, how was it paid? Was it paid by a regular check? Was it paid by a virtual card, by an e-payment? What we refer to as Avid Pay Direct. So there are different options that are available to us, and these last 2 steps give us the ability and the visibility now from within TimberScan to be able to see how that vendor was paid and what the current payment status is. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about this 7-step process. Let's talk about a couple of other things before we actually kind of dive into the software. So what are the benefits of the purchase to pay automation? Well, obviously visibility. So we're able to see the purchase orders, invoices, payments, everything flowing through accounts payable, and it's easily accessible on any device. Simplicity, again, tracking down those invoices, the payments, and related documentation. Everything is compiled and it's in TimberScan, and we can pull it up and we can see it all together if we need it. Speed. Obviously, if we can track it down and we can just click one button, we're able to see both invoices and payments more quickly, so we know exactly where everything stands at any given time. Everything's centralized. It's now in one repository. It's in TimberScan. So we're keeping the purchase orders, the invoices, and the payments all together. And then maintaining control. One of the things and one of the concerns that I think some companies have with respect to the payment side is this quote-unquote loss of control. But I think it's important to emphasize, and hopefully what you'll be able to see when I go through this presentation, is that you never lose control of the payment process. You're able to manage that from start to finish, and you're able to see everything along the way and approve and release the payments when you're ready. So nothing takes place without you deciding if and when it's going to take place. So if we kind of summarize and we look at this from a 20,000-foot view, there are really 4 kind of key steps involved in this purchase to pay process. The first step is the purchase itself, the purchase order. Was there a purchase order created? How was it created? Was it within Sage 300, as I mentioned before? Maybe it was created within TimberScan. Maybe we didn't actually physically create a purchase order, but maybe we have created commitments or not. Either way, once the invoice arrives in TimberScan, we are able to manage against that purchase. So whether we're matching that invoice up to the purchase order and receiver, whether we're processing against a commitment, or whether or not that invoice came in and we didn't actually create a purchase order or a commitment, and we're just entering the invoice and coding it and getting it approved. Either way, TimberScan works exactly like it always has, and then it sends that information over to, in this case, Sage 300 CRE. You notice there are a few other systems grayed out. These are the other applications that TimberScan also has an integration to, being Sage 100 Intact and also Acumatica. Now, the final step in this process is the invoices have now updated, in this case, Sage 300. They have, we are now at the point where we're going to go through and cut checks, quote unquote, but we're not actually going to print the checks. We're going to select the checks, send them over to the Avid Pay network, while at the same time, they're going to be managed from within TimberScan, and we'll show you how that works. Okay, so this really just kind of pulls everything back together. Again, making everything accessible from within one place and being able to pull this information up from within TimberScan if need be. So this is the last slide that I'm going to present for the moment before we actually jump into the software. And you notice here, the reason why I wanted to highlight this is because there are 10 steps involved with respect to actually cutting a check manually. There's the actual check selection process itself. There's printing the checks, sending them out to a physical printer, preparing the checks, having the checks signed, mailing the checks, putting these in envelopes, filing check copies, payments received. So we confirm the payment, we do a payment inquiry, we do any follow-up associated with it, and then we do the reconciliation. So 10 steps, which we're going to hopefully reduce to virtually, only a couple of steps once we're finished here. So with that, what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen so that you can see TimberScan. And this will take just a second, but in a moment you should be able to see TimberScan. Let me just get rid of that. Okay, hopefully you can see TimberScan on your screen now. Emily, Mike, can you confirm that you can see TimberScan?
All good.
Good, all right, great, thank you. All right, so obviously I believe, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe that everyone that is viewing today's presentation is a current TimberScan client. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here in traditional TimberScan. I want to get to the pay side of things here in a few moments. But I just wanted to kind of, quickly walk through the workflow process and I guess explain how we could take everything from the initial purchase through the pay without ever having to touch a piece of paper, and basically kind of creating this efficient workflow method that would allow us to do everything in one place without ever touching the piece of paper. So if we start at the point where we've created a purchase somehow, whether that purchase order again was created from wherever it was, and we go into the invoice arrival, let me just clear this. There are, several different ways in which we are able to go about acquiring invoices. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is if you have a designated AP email address, TimberScan has the ability to monitor that email address where you're not having to go in, check the email address constantly, and drag and drop each individual attachment from the email to this screen or to a file. Basically, TimberScan does that for you behind the scenes. So all I would have to do is come in here, open the file. I can grab that whole group of invoices all together in a batch, and I can pull them up into the acquire screen, go ahead and process and send them off to wherever they need to go in AP entry. So that was the first thing I wanted to highlight is more and more of our clients are utilizing the email monitoring program and sending the data onto data entry without having to go through and acquire, putting these invoices onto a scanning device or having to drag and drop every single one of them. The system with the email monitoring program basically does that for you. The second thing that I wanted to highlight is in invoice entry. So, of course, I have a number of invoices here to process, and instead of me having to go through and key in all of the information associated with this invoice, what, again, a number of our clients have taken advantage of is TimberScan Capture. So with Capture, I'm able to read key information from the invoice along with setting up defaults so that I now am able to populate the invoice entry screen as you see here. So for HD Supply, when I acquired their invoice and I sent it to data entry and I call it up in data entry, you notice everything that's already been populated. Vendor number, invoice number, date amount, so on and so forth, including the job and cost category. So again, streamlining this process, making it simple, making it efficient, where I'm not having to go in and handle a piece of paper and also not having to go in and do a lot of key punching. In this case, I could have taken this invoice, accepted it, sent it on to the approvers right from here without hypothetically ever touching the keyboard and ever keying in any transactional information. So again, I just want to point that out. If you're not using TimberScan Capture, you might want to just consider it as a way to become more efficient, if you will. Now, I'm not going to go through the approval process. We're going to look at TimberScan Go here in a couple minutes. But suffice to say that these invoices can be approved in a number of different methods, including using TimberScan Go. If you're not using it, it does give you the ability to do everything mobilely. So I could approve invoices using any type of device, could use my phone, etc. But now let's say those invoices got approved and they've been sent over to Sage 300. I'm going to go in there next. Okay. And I'm going to choose the print checks option. So now we've updated Sage 300. We're now at the point where we're going to go out, we're going to execute payment. We're going to decide that we've got several vendors that we want to pay. So just like I normally would, I'm going to choose the print checks option. What's going to change, however, is the destination of where this information is going to go. So here in printer setup, instead of me sending this off to my physical printer, I'm going to choose this option called Print to Avid. Now what that does is Print to Avid is basically, it's a print driver, which means that it's intercepting the data that would normally go out to a physical printer. It's going to take that data, compile it, and it's going to send it somewhere else for me to be able to consume. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm going to say OK. And when I do that, it will then send that data over to TimberScan Go, and that's where we're going to go next. Let's get out of here. So I chose Print to Avid. I didn't send that information out to an actual printer. Instead, it gets compiled into TimberScan, where I'm going to be able to call it up next. Let's go into Go. You notice with TimberScan Go, I mean, there's dashboard functionality throughout TimberScan, but in TimberScan Go, we've added a couple of dashboards that are specific to payments. So payments by vendor, and of course I can highlight, I can kind of scroll around on the pie chart like we could before, or payments by payment type, how are those payments actually made. So I've got some dashboard functionality, and I can show you here in a few minutes how you can actually drill in, and it will show you the inquiry that will let you know how this vendor, for example, was paid. But before I get there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into pay control. So these are the two key areas that we've added to TimberScan: pay control and pay inquiry. I'm going to start in pay control because, again, I mentioned earlier that, a lot of times there are, people who are concerned that, well, I print checks and I say print to Avid and I've lost all control. Well, in this case, you haven't. Because when I said print to Avid, what it did is it sent that payment data over here to my pay control system. And I'm going to go into my approval screen here. I'm going to do a search, and you can see I've got some criteria that I can use to search if I need to. Let's take off the filter. And I now have transactions that were sent, instead of actually going out to the printer, were sent here into pay control. And I could go down through and I could start selecting these one by one if I want. For right now, I'm just going to say, go ahead and browse all of these. Now, here's what it does. It sends to pay control system, basically simulating what would happen if you printed a check. So it now has the check information. It actually creates that check number from Sage 300, drops it here for you to be able to see the check itself. On the top, I have the check stub with, various information here that's, lined up for me to be able to see, and I can call up more detail if I need to. And then in the middle, I see the invoices that this particular payment is paying. And you notice how it automatically calls up the invoice image for me. So for, for a number of companies, what I've seen is the typical scenario is the checks get printed. Someone has to physically take each check. They have to attach it to the invoice or invoices that check is paying, and all of the supporting documents behind it before someone can go through and approve this. Well, TimberScan just did that for you. We've done it all within the system, so I don't have to physically handle the check. I don't have to physically put that check with the packet of invoice and supporting documents. It's all available to me right here. And I can simply go through and I can approve this payment when I'm ready. And I'll go on to the next one so you can see a little bit more here. Here's another transaction, another invoice. Same concept here. If I click on this particular button, it will allow me to actually see more detail. So now I'm actually looking at how the transaction, the invoice was coded, which is nice as well. So I'm not only able to see the payment record and the invoice that it paid, but how we did the distribution. So I see all of this information. We'll go on to the next one, same thing. Got the invoice info. I think I have one here in a second. Here's one that actually has the invoice image, and here's a supporting document that was attached. In this case, it was a receipt, for example. So again, and this is designed, the reason why we've dropped this into TimberScan Go is because TimberScan Go is a browser-based application that is also, quote-unquote, mobilized. It uses a responsive user interface, which would allow me to be able to see this information on any device. So hypothetically, I could be on my phone. It renders this information to the phone with everything for me to be able to see, just like I see here. I could actually be going through and approving and releasing the funds for various payments or checks that were generated from my phone or from my iPad, from anywhere, from home. So I'm able to go through and see this information. Approving is one option. Another option is the hold option here. So let's go back and see, because I know I have some transactions I believe that are on hold. Same type of scenario here. I'll just go search and we'll find them. And we'll just go ahead and call them up. And it works the same way. So I've got, this particular transaction on hold. Now, hold works in kind of two ways. Not only did I put this payment on hold, but you can also, TimberScan Go also has a notification system associated with it. So I could have sent a notification or created a notification that alerts me let's say every day, periodically, I decide how often I want to be alerted to let me know that I put this particular transaction, this payment transaction on hold. Why did I do that? Well, maybe we're waiting for some sort of a compliance issue to be resolved. Maybe we're waiting for the return of a lien waiver, for example. So those scenarios are why I might want to put something on hold, use the notification system to continue to alert me and notify me that we've put these transactions on hold, and then when I'm ready, I can go ahead and approve it if I need to. Now, finally, what does voiding do? What void does is it says, okay, even though we went into the print checks option in Sage 300, we sent the data here, I'm not going to pay this. I need to get this voided. Let's get it out of here. So it eliminates it from here. And it sends message data back to Sage 300, where you then go into Sage 300, you void out that transaction in Sage 300, and reissue another payment. Okay, so this is all the pay control side of things. So for anyone that needs to have multi-level approvals of payments or is concerned about, I don't want to lose control. I want to make sure that when we do the print checks option that, someone else can see, they have visibility to everything, that they can actually say and check it off and say, yes, I'm approving this payment. It's all right here in front of me. Now, let's look at what happens on the back end. Let's say that I've gone ahead and I've approved some transactions. Now what it does is it sends that data to the AvidPay network. Now think of AvidPay or AvidXchange as it is a financial institution. So basically what's happening is that AvidXchange, we're working with thousands and thousands of vendors. And as these transactions get sent to the pay network, we've already negotiated to work with that vendor to determine how they want to be paid. And then we issue them, different methods, which we'll talk about in a moment. But something else that I'm going to get to here in a few minutes when we're done with the actual demonstration itself. Also keep in mind that because of the fact that the way that these are being processed and the fact that we have so many vendors in the network, that you are eligible for rebates that you can take advantage of through this. We've seen, up to date, we've seen several clients who are using the rebate that they're eligible for by sending payments through the network to be able to do things like pay their TimberScan support. So that's something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper, but just keep that in mind. But now what we're going to do, let's say we've released those funds to the AvidPay network and those vendors get paid. Let's go into the pay inquiry. Again, I'll do a search. Again, I could put in specific criteria, but I'm just going to go through and, again, I'm going to look at it from this perspective. And what I'm seeing here are all of the transactions. I didn't put in any specific criteria, so it just brought up all of the transactions that have been sent through the network. It tells me what the current status is, entity, vendor, vendor ID, how they were paid, what the dollar amount is. I've got all of my information available to me on the screen. And what I can do is let's just create a filter. And let's say that I want to say, let's do everything that's cleared. So we'll just look at the cleared transactions for right now. And you see the options here. So some vendors, in some cases, were paid by virtual card. In other cases, it might have been the e-payment, or what we refer to as AvidPay Direct. And then others may have actually wanted an actual check issue. Regardless, everything goes through the pay network, and everything is worked from the pay network to the vendor. Now, the other advantage to releasing this to the AvidPay network is you also, at that point, absolve yourself of the risk of things like check fraud, for example, because then Avid Exchange assumes the risk for anything that may have happened once you release those funds. Now, if we kind of scroll down through here, we're looking at different transactions. Certain things that I can do here. You notice I've got some action buttons here. So if I want to see my prepay information, I can do that. I can also see my proof of payment info. So here's my proof of payment for this particular transaction that I wanted to see. It's available to me here. I can also download any of this. So if I wanted to just drop this down for whatever reason to call it up later on and see it. Now, the other thing that we're also doing, for anyone that's doing any type of substantiated billings, for time and material or cost plus billings, or for a loan draw, for example, if you need to be able to see the invoice and all the supporting documents associated with it all the way down to the payment, we're also attaching this proof of payment to that particular compiled data if you need it. Okay, so we started with simply saying, instead of sending those payment transactions out to a physical printer, we said print to Avid. We have the ability to manage that payment process through the Avid, through the pay control system, and we see what the status of everything is on the back end through the payment inquiry. So at no time do we ever lose control of this process, right up to the point where we've said we're ready to release those funds and we want to have the vendor paid. Okay, so with that, let's return now to the PowerPoint slide. Okay, and we should be back here. So again, we are reviewing those 10 steps that we talked about earlier with respect to processing checks, if you will, or physical checks manually. If we go from there, once we start to build in the embedded pay program, we've eliminated 7 of those 10 steps. We're down to bill selection, electronic approval, which we saw in the embedded pay program, and reconciliation, which we can see on the back end. Those are our 3 steps involved. Once we incorporate the Avid Pay program in the embedded pay program inside TimberScan. Okay, so for the purposes of a takeaway, if anyone wants to be able to kind of see this through the PowerPoint deck, we've also included a snapshot of this print to Avid function that you see here, and also a snapshot of the embedded pay experience inside TimberScan. Let's talk about the promotional items that we have in place today. So when you implement the start to run the Avid Pay network, there is an implementation process. There's setup involved for us to get your bank information, get that set up, and get all the vendor info prepared. So there is an implementation fee, which we refund to you once you've adopted or achieved 80% of your payment adoption. So if you said, well, we're going to plan to process 200 payments per month through the network, once you've received 80%, achieved 80% of that, you get that $2,500 back. The normal per transaction fee, because that's the way Avid Pay is charged, is per transaction. That is normally charged at 89 cents per payment. For right now, with this promotion, as we're implementing the embedded pay program, we've reduced that to 55 cents per payment. Cost of a stamp, but basically, cost of a stamp is going up, so this is actually going to be less than the cost of a stamp. And finally, receiving the credit. So I referenced this earlier. I talked about how you're able to receive credit for the number of payments that you make through the network, combined with the number of vendors that we currently work with that are in the network. And here's a snapshot of what it would look like. And this is actually, I've got an update here for you here. So you see this here, but let me just tell you about a new option, a new promotion that we've just implemented. If you process 100 payments through the network, we will credit you $2,000 towards your TimberScan support. For as little as 100 payments, you'll get a $2,000 credit applied, and you can use it against your TimberScan support if you want. For 200 payments, that would be a $3,000 credit. 300 payments, a $4,000 credit, and 500 payments, 500 payments will be a $4,000 credit. So even though you're seeing this, as I mentioned, there is an update to this, and we'll send that update out to you. So for as little as 100 payments, you can have a $2,000 credit applied to your TimberScan support of your subscription. Okay, so with that, why don't we open it up for any questions?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
We have one question. Does this, well, there's a couple. The first one, does this work with Stage 100 contractor?
It does. So we have the Avid Pay network is set up to work with Sage 100 contractor, and that embedded pay program that you just saw me demonstrate within TimberScan Go. We are right now in the process of, we have a couple of clients, I should say a few clients that are they're actually processing this through TimberScan Titanium for 100. And we'll refer to them as kind of an early adopter. So we've got some clients that are currently using this as early adopters. They're testing it out, and they are processing their transactions. So the answer to your question is yes.
Okay. This seems like a lot of steps. What would you recommend for a small business who only has one person doing all the steps?
Well, that's interesting, because actually we spoke with a client earlier today that kind of was in the same situation. So bear in mind, when I showed you what happens inside TimberScan with that pay control application, that's only for a company or a client who has an approval process with regard to, after your checks get printed, that someone has to approve them. If you're basically kind of a one person that prints the checks and sends them out, you don't have to do that pay control step. It's available to you. But what you can do, we can set it up so that when you go into print checks, you choose the option to print to Avid, that we can send that data directly to the Avid Pay network, and your payments will be dispersed at that point. So you don't need to go through that pay control option if you don't want. It's available to you, but we realize that there are probably, maybe as many as half of our clients who aren't necessarily, who don't require that extra layer of approval, if you will, once the checks get printed. So you don't have to use it. So it's basically one step. It's going in and saying print to Avid, boom, off they go to the Avid Pay network, you're done. You don't have to do anything else.
Cool. All right, there's one more. To get the PO to Sage, is it a manual export or import and not a sync?
To get the purchase order, I assume they're referring to the purchase order from TimberScan.
Yes.
That being the case, no, it is an export. It's not like TimberScan, in that there is an export and an import because of the fact that we have to get it into the system in a way that, unfortunately, Sage doesn't allow us to be able to use an API. They don't have one available for us. So we have to be able to do an export-import.
Okay, there's another one. Is the AvidPay pricing based on volume of payments or number of users?
It's not based on number of users. It's based on number of transactions, number of payments that you run through the network, charged at 55 cents per payment. But think about this. You could potentially have, depending on the number of payments, you could potentially have a rebate that pays for all of your transactions, your 55 cents per payment, and possibly also pays for your TimberScan support. You can do both. We've done some, what we could refer to as vendor matches, and for as little as maybe 100 to a couple of hundred payments, that could result in more than a couple of $1,000s in a rebate, which would pay for the transactions and pay for your TimberScan support if you want.
Yep, that's all the questions I see.
Okay. Well, I guess I would just conclude by saying thank you very much for taking the time to view this presentation. We're really excited about this. We see that the possibility of being able to give you the opportunity to do everything from within TimberScan without ever having to touch a piece of paper. It's that whole purchase to pay process that we're very excited about.